Welcome to Cultivate, a Veritas Academy podcast, where we explore truth, beauty, and goodness through meaningful conversation. We invite you to join us in discussions meant to edify your mind, encourage your heart, and equip your family to live abundantly in Christ.
Welcome back to the Cultivate podcast. I have some visitors today from Barcelona, but that means something a little different here at Veritas Academy. Many of our rooms are named after different cities of the world, and we try to pick memorable and wonderful cities. Our learning support room here at Veritas is named Barcelona. So when I say I have 3 visitors from Barcelona, I'm not sure if any of them have any Spanish or Basque in them. It's from that room. So today we're talking to some of our learning support folks here at Veritas. Maybe right now I'm talking to all of our learning support folks here at Veritas, although our teachers do a lot of learning support as well. And what we're going to do is we're going to explore what we do here at Veritas, why we do it. But I wanted first just talk about and get to that point where we can see how we enjoy what I called, getting ready for this podcast, that aha moment. Like when you see a student understand how to do something and you see that level of confidence and assurance grow, and that you see them gaining self-esteem in the old way that we used to gain self-esteem, which is by actually being able to do things. Sorry, that's a little rip at the modern world there. But first, I want you to get to know each of the ladies around the table with me. So we're going to start with Christine Hertzog. Chris, if you could introduce yourself, tell us a little bit about you. You don't have to tell us all the fun and interesting facts, because there are many of them that would bear their own podcast. But Christine is actually the reason why it's named Barcelona. She's a Floridian, and the Pennsylvania winters are challenging for her. So we at least want to put up bright artwork in Barcelona so that helps you through the winter. So talk about your work here at Veritas and Learning Support, and then we'll go around to Deb and to Sandy.
Yes, so my work here is to help any student that is struggling in any part of academics, come alongside them, help them find their weaknesses and their strengths and play on both of those. And I came into it, I started out as a homeschooling parent using the Veritas curriculum. Then we moved to Lancaster, and I became a Veritas parent for many years. Loved it. And then when my youngest was old enough and I wanted to start, working outside the home, I thought, hey, I can sub. I know the students, I know the teachers, I know the community, I know the curriculum.
Man,
and I started.
That's a lot of connections there.
There were a lot of connections. So I started subbing, and it just kind of morphed. I had some struggling students in my children's classes. I already knew them, pulled them aside.
You started your own DIY learning support.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. And it kind of morphed into what it is today, which is awesome. I have an awesome team, just ladies that just know their stuff. And that's how I got here.
And I'll add this to each of your responses here. What do you really enjoy about it? What makes you, when you're walking in the morning, I get to see everyone walk in about 3 times, or at least I get to pass Mrs. Bentley, who's already taking care of the cafeteria. Actually, if I showed up on time, she wouldn't quite be taking care of the cafeteria, but I have a lot of meetings in the morning. What is making you excited about doing this work when you're coming up the sidewalk there into the main entrance at Veritas Academy?
The students themselves. I love them. I love to see when I walk down the hall or walk in, I see a student, and I know from working with them, what they learn or what they're struggling with, or just their accomplishments. I walked in with a little, I shouldn't say little, he's 3rd grade now, taught him last year just in Latin, and it was just fun to see his little smile. I know his personality, and it's just the student themselves.
Tell us a little bit about the work that you do here, Mrs. Bentley, and then what makes you excited when you're walking in the morning?
Well, I work with kindergarten and first grade mostly. I am a certified dyslexia tutor with the Orton-Gillingham method, and that approach addresses multiple senses such as sight, hearing, touch, movement, and that we all go together to help students learn. I actually came here because I had a student at the Dyslexia Center that I tutored, and her mother said to me, "Hey, they're looking for a kindergarten assistant, so why don't you apply?" And 2 weeks later, I was here. So
there you go.
Yep. I really love being here. I love the excitement in the children. I just love seeing them learn, and it's just so much fun to be able to teach them.
And when you see those students getting that skill of reading, which is going to be foundational
Definitely
to so much of what we do, I know that has to be thrilling.
It is. It's definitely thrilling.
So, Sandy, I think you're the newest part of the team here. So tell us a little bit about what you do and what is it that is the cup of coffee that gets you going in the morning?
I am new. Our family's been here. This is our third year now. And I started out as an assistant in third grade, and I have secondary students. So when I moved into a more support role in the office, I met with Chris, and she asked if we could offer the 7th and 8th graders some support in transitioning to secondary.
Yeah, because it's a big transition.
It's a huge transition. They don't have just one teacher coaching them through all the pieces of their day anymore. Now they're in charge of managing their own lives.
7th and 8th graders in charge.
Yeah. So I'm here to just coach those 7th and 8th graders, especially in some organizational issues.
7th graders have organizational issues?
Yeah, you'd be surprised.
Is it just the boys, or is it?
Well, maybe. No, not actually. All 7th and 8th graders have different pieces that they each need to work on, and to be able to craft a strategy that works for each student individually throughout the rest of their secondary education. So some of that is study skills. It might be like how to learn science. Each new subject that they come across requires a slightly different technique for studying, and I can help coach them with that as well.
Well, so I am on the front end of a lot of interactions with families here at Veritas, and sometimes I see this, and it comes in many different ways, where I think you have families that are concerned or worried is that they think of Veritas, and I hope rightly so, as an academically challenging environment, right? I was talking with our college counselor, Rachel Keel, and we're landing just about every year now in that around 20 to 30% of our students making national merit recognition. Last year it was really high. We had a small number of students that way. The percentage, we just juiced the percentages that way. Mrs. Forbes' statistics class can help you with this. This year we have a little bit of a bigger class, a little bit of a lower percentage, but my goodness, that's just ridiculously impressive. But that sometimes makes parents ask that question, can my student do this? Can they, or what if they struggle with something? So when you're thinking about how we're treating students who are having challenges, and honestly, fighting through or trusting God to be faithful through challenges is so much more important than just about anything we do here at Veritas. How does seeing them as a person made in the image of God, why is that so critical or crucial when it comes to learning support?
Well, each of us is made in God's image, but we each have gifts, but we also have strengths and weaknesses, and we are to use everything for God's glory and our good. So we need to creatively encourage their strengths and build up their weaknesses so that each individual can reach their potential.
That's wonderful. I mean, and it really gets them headed down that path of being comfortable, not just in the body of Christ, but that part of the body of Christ, that special gifting that he's given to them. It's why someone says, well, why don't you just do the accounting work here at Veritas Ty? And I say, because I want Veritas to exist. And if I'm your accountant, you have trouble, because I believe in faith-based accounting, which is CPAs that I know have never even heard of that kind of concept. That's not true. That is a caricature, but it's still, if I'm driving that car, it's going to hit the tree. But every student, God is making every person to, and it's so critical for them to see his handiwork in them, and then to also recognize that there's a lot of work to do. So why spend so much time? This is going to start down at that bottom foundation, what we're doing. Why spend so much time on math and reading in the younger grades? Why do we practice things over and over again? Why not just let kids run around and be creative?
And I love creativity.
No, and we do want that,
yes,
right?
Yes, but foundation. Math, reading, they are foundation. And you need that for every subject. So when you're memorizing, your grammar chants, understanding the parts of speech turns around and helps you learning other languages and vice versa.
Correct.
And, reading, oh, goodness, I could go on and on. When you get to secondary omnibus and you're reading all these wonderful classical books.
Yeah, omnibus being our great books program here at Veritas.
Yes.
So, yeah.
It has the vocabulary, such deep vocabulary. And to be able to read those and to comprehend those, it just starts at the foundation. Math facts, chanting math facts. Get it so ingrained in your head that when you get to algebra and geometry, you're seeing all these other new, I don't know what you call them, new things in math that isn't just your addition and subtraction. That's already there, and you don't have to spend your time.
Yeah. And as a classical school, we sometimes call ourselves schools that teach the trivium, or we would say that teach the 7 great liberal arts. And what those things are really just mastery of words, grammar, logic, and rhetoric, and mastery of numbers, arithmetic, geometry, harmonics, and astronomy. That's what the ancients would have thought about as mastery of words and mastery of numbers. Now, that starts not with mastery, but with that foundational work that we're doing in the lower grades, and if they need help in learning support, that grows into something, though, that can be, if we do that foundational work well, really, really important. So anybody want to add to that about that focus on reading and math and how important it is? I guess one of the reasons I wanted to dig on this one a little bit is because I worry that our culture has stopped doing this. I don't know what maybe you have seen. Sometimes I read stuff in the paper. Sometimes I just get these anecdotal stories from people, and I go, that can't be true. That the person doesn't know that 75 plus 15 is 90, and 90 is more than 85. That's an adult that one of my children was working with, and she was able to do the math in her head, and they thought she was a genius, and I'm like, that's not good. That's not good. So any other, what does that foundational strength do, and why invest so much in that?
Well, a foundation is what you build upon. The deeper a foundation goes, the higher your structure can be. And if you have solid roots, then everything that is built upon that, going back to the idea of being made in the image of God, glories are poured on us by the Lord. What can we achieve with a deep foundation and our brains being stretched and built?
Yeah, that reminds me of that phrase that Lewis uses, the weight of glory, C.S. Lewis. And it's really, God is making us into the kind of persons that are not just going to be crushed by glory, but that we're going to be made to bear it. We're going to be able to made to bear that weight. So I think one of the funnest things about being involved in a school, it's really, and I've been here for a while. One of the students said, did you know the dinosaurs, Mr. Fisher, when you were younger? And I said, no, but I have been called a dinosaur before. He thought that was interesting. But it's when you see students that get it, that get something, that understand. I was trying to think of an example of this, and my wife is our fourth grade teacher, and she's a pretty darn good teacher, I would say. And she talks to them about the rule of nines, which is that every multiplication table of 9 adds up to nines. So what am I saying?
Every item in the multiplication
Chris,
table.
Thank you. I've not. But so you've got 72, that equals 9. 81, that equals 9. 54, that equals 9. 45 equals 9 as well, as does 63. So it is when the students, I remember sitting in class once doing, I was just in class for some reason observing, and these kids were like, oh my goodness. It's like the universe has opened up to me, right, and I know something that I don't think anyone else knows. So we all love it when we see that child have that aha moment. When that happens in your work here at Veritas, when have you seen that? And I think it's really powerful when we can share stories of when we've really seen that happen in the lives of students. So any good stories about the aha moments that you've had here?
I have a fun one. It's from your wife's class, fourth grade. It was fourth grade Latin. And I was working with a student who was just struggling, but he had the foundations. He knew all his Latin chants. And so he was working on a translation, and I just prompted him. I said, okay, tell me your declensions that you know. They're noun declensions. They are endings. And he just rattled them off. I said, okay, so look at your sentence. Do you see any of those endings? And he's like, oh, I do. And I said, well, which one? He's like, second declension neuter. And I was like, yes. So we did the same thing with the verb. And then all of a sudden, he was like, I know what this says. And it was so,
Bing,
yes, it was so cool. It was just a really fun part, of my job to be able to witness this light. I'm like, yes, I don't need to work with you anymore. Yeah. You're on your own. I worked myself out of a job.
Next.
Yes.
Anybody else?
I have a silly one. So helping students with lockers, keeping them organized is on my list of things to do. And there are typically students that just struggle all year long to keep that locker organized. So there was one student last year that we just needed an intervention. So we took a few moments and cleaned his locker out together thoroughly. And a couple weeks later, I ran into him in the hall and he said, Mrs. Olcott, I can find things in my locker now.
Oh my goodness.
It was a beautiful moment.
The lights had gone on.
Yes.
So when we talk about what we do here at Veritas, like I said, sometimes it can be kind of intimidating. Like what you said there, Christine, was, in fourth grade Latin, which I'm sure there's somebody out there listening like, did she say that right? Incorrect. And then the students, rattling off their noun and verb endings. And those things are really happening around here. But what could you say to the family who has a student, and many families are not this circumspect, but I do still get families that come in and say, my kid's a pretty normal kid. They're not super gifted. How could we encourage them that the normal kids succeed really well here at Veritas? What characteristics do you see in the young men and women that come here, maybe come here from the side, transfer in, what are the characteristics of the ones that succeed or that just hit this environment and just take off like a rocket?
That's a good one. It's probably the eagerness to learn, integrity in their study skills, and also, how do you define normal? And how do you define
I would just
success?
Say, in our culture today, I don't think we're going to get much help with that.
Yeah. So Sandy and I were talking about this earlier, and she brought up a really good point. We don't measure success with grades. I hope I'm not taking your words from you, Sandy.
Go ahead.
Which I love, because some of these students, yes, they struggle. There is a young lady here. She's a senior now. I worked with her year after year after year on her math. She struggled so much.
And learned how to fight.
And she did what needed to be done. She took it home. She went to her teacher. She worked with me before school.
I'd hire that girl.
Yeah, you should. She is a solid, solid young lady. And, but she's a senior now. And last year, she was taking trig, and she struggled with pre-algebra. But for her, her math grades were never, in the 90s. But that's okay. She had tenacity. She has tenacity and has that work ethic, which is that's going to benefit her in life.
Sure. Because we're actually playing a longer game. It's
Yes,
not,
absolutely.
graduation is not the end, it's a commencement.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I want to add, grades are a diagnostic tool that teachers use to identify where more support is needed. They're not the goal. The goal of education is character, and what you're talking about, developing that perseverance and joy in their learning, that's what we're about here at Veritas.
Yeah. And, I do, when I've done, I'm not teaching right now, but when I've been teaching, I'm usually teaching the oldest students. And I say, I tell the guys, when you get down on your knee and ask that young woman to marry you, she's not going to give you a B+ or an 84 or something like that. It's a yes or a no. And you're going to feel like that might even be more important than your grade point average at that point. So I'm trying to get you ready. I'm trying to get you ready to make a good case there, not just to earn some kind of honor based on a number that really is just a diagnostic tool. How does academic confidence and academic success, how do you see those two working together? Because sometimes when you're working with a student in learning support, you're going to come in and the student might not have a lot of confidence at the beginning because they're not having a lot of success in a particular subject. So how do confidence and success work together in academic support?
I think you have to know the student and build on their insecurities. If I'm working with a student.
Now you say build on their insecurities.
Well, yes, recognize them and.
So you're basically saying start where they're at?
Start where they're at and recognize the small accomplishments and be their cheerleader. Make a big deal out of it because it is.
Right. Emily my wife does a great job of this. And I'm like, you're celebrating that little a thing. And she's like, That's the beginning of the next win.
Or even, I love this. I just saw it on, I don't know, a podcast or something about celebrating their failures.
Yes.
Because when they fail, that is their biggest time learning. And I'll have a student come in just so discouraged. They got, a low grade or whatever. We point out, look what you did get. Look how far you've come. And look what you're learning to do because you made that mistake.
Yeah.
You're never going to make that mistake again.
Yeah, I used to coach girls basketball, middle school girls basketball, the most exciting sport in history because no one knows what's going to happen next. And I would tell the girls, we're 5,000 mistakes away from being a really good team. Let's make the mistakes as quickly as we can, okay? So, and it really is that tenacity it takes to face down failure and to learn from it is one of the most important character building things that we have here at Veritas. And I think that is actually a pillar on which American culture has been built. And I think that for the last 25 years, American education has been trying to get rid of that pillar. We try to make students feel good about themselves, and we think that feeling good is the thing that's going to make them accomplish things, when really we need to help them to accomplish things, and those accomplishments are going to help them feel good. We need them to have that basic identity of being made in God's image down so strong that even like an F on a test is not the biggest thing. We had a young man once. It's a wonderful story. He was a senior, and he was not going to, be on the national merit list or something like that. He was a senior, in fact, and he was taking math with a very bright freshman. So he's a senior. He's older than any other student in the class, and there's this freshman that's ahead of pace who's taking classes with them all. Well, that freshman, for I think the first and only time in her life, failed a test. And she started tearing up, and it was the end of class. I was in observing the teacher, and as she started crying, he went over and he put his arm around her very gently and just tapped her on the shoulder, and he said, "Hey, it's going to be okay. I fail all the time, and I'm still going to graduate." So, and I just thought that's so much more important than any grade on a test. So
that is a perspective in life, right? Like I get up tomorrow, Jesus is still here with me tomorrow. Mercies are new every morning.
Mm-hmm.
I did want to mention that there's a sweet spot in learning.
Okay.
Where every human, we love a good challenge.
Yes.
But we're burdened and broken down when the challenge is too great. And that's why learning support is here.
Have you read the book recently, The Skill Code?
No.
Okay, you're gonna have.
Write it down.
I'm just gonna buy a bunch of copies and just start handing them out. But it's talking about that sweet spot of challenge, and how learning happens within that challenging sweet spot. And if we go too low or too high, we either overwhelm or we just make things boring to students. Mm-hmm. So how do we deal with this? There are a lot of sins that all of us are liable to, and our culture has sins that they're liable to. A lot of times now I see sins in American culture that are really sins of envy. We get angry because people have what we don't have, or they have abilities that we don't have. Americans tend to be jealous people. So that means if my friend gets a nice sports car, I want to go out and earn money so that I can buy my own sports car. I worry that Americans are becoming the people that go and take hatchets and sledgehammers and beat the other guy's sports car so both of us don't have it. But when we deal with academics, God didn't give everybody the same abilities. Okay? Now, you can slow down everyone to try to make that work. But how can we love students and help them to cultivate virtue, even when they're cultivating it in an environment that's God made, but not fair. Does that make sense? We had a young man once who, he went away to a very challenging school, and he came back, and I could tell he was, he looked tired. And I said, how's it going? And he said, I'm really busy. I have to increment my schedule out every 15 minutes to make sure that I'm always on task. And he said, I've even had to cut my sleep back to like between 6 and 7 hours a night. And I was like, you sleep 6 or 7 hours a night? He's like, yeah. And I was like, well, here at Veritas, we were working you hard. And he was like, never below 9 hours a night. And what happened, I still remember his entrance test because it took so long. Because he was coming in as a third grader and started, our entrance test says if you pass this a number of questions, you move on to the next section. And we stopped him somewhere in Algebra 1 because he was just intuiting the math. And I'm like, well, that's just not fair. That's not fair. So I know that sometimes when a student's really struggling, it can be dispiriting. How do you work with students in that environment? Because they're gonna go to class and they're gonna see that they have abilities sometimes that others don't have, and then they're gonna see sometimes there's a person who's not struggling with this thing, and it's eating my lunch. So how do you help students in that kind of a situation?
Well, students are whole people.
Yeah.
The Veritas has a culture that is wholesome, and teachers know students as people. And they're a little community, and they interact with each other, and they're friends with each other.
Yeah.
And life isn't fair.
It isn't.
The sooner they realize that, I think the easier it'll be going out into the world.
Yeah.
And parents at home can notice students' work, look over what they've been doing, and highlight and celebrate.
Yeah. And that's kind of what I wanted to transition into now, was talking a little bit about how parents can help out in learning support. So let's talk a little bit about some of the things, and I don't want to get down to maybe the micro level on this, but just to say, what are some of the characteristics that you see in parents who end up being very successful partners with our school, especially in this area of learning support? What do those kinds of parents do?
I think the parent being interested in what their children are learning right alongside. Our students go to so many awesome field trips.
Okay. Yes.
Museums, and being interested, or even being interested in their homework. Hey, you learned, okay, I'm going to pick Latin. I love Latin. But, be excited about what your child learned. When I go into a second grade class and begin teaching, I don't teach it this year, but I did in the past teach second grade. They're so excited to learn.
Yes.
And they're so excited to tell you what they learn, and be excited with them. And now
did you say dads? Oh,
I forget the question.
Yeah.
I got sidetracked.
No, well, so one of the things that the question was,
parents.
what can parents do to really help their kids thrive as they partner with us, especially in this area of learning support? And it's that motivation that children get when they see a parent taking notice of them doing well. Okay, and I'm only XY chromosome around the table today, so that I think is especially powerful for dads, because a lot of times mom ends up being really more home focused, and I'm not trying to speak stereotypically, except that the stereotypes are usually correct. At least they are in my house. Emily cares about the details in a way that I've never been able to gin that up. If I say, hey, I saw that. Wow, that was a good paper. That was a well-argued essay. That can mean a lot. In any other things that you see parents doing that really are things that help their kids to thrive. Oh, I did want to point this out, and this was like a reading thing, that they've done studies on parents reading with their children and how powerful that is.
We were talking about that earlier.
Okay. They've also done studies of kids who are in environments where they see their parents reading all the time. And both of those things are very powerful. Just that parents are interested in academic things, or not reading's not really an academic thing. It's a kind of a macro life skill, but that it does signal that you're into learning about things. So you want to speak to that?
Yeah, reading aloud with your kid is a sweet thing to do together. It's very bonding, but you also expose them to ideas and language that is above their own reading level. Their brains can take it in. They are expanding and understanding and making connections at a higher level than what they can accomplish individually on their own. But together with you, they enter into a new world. You could read stories with them that are based in the history period that they're studying, or anything. It doesn't really matter. Enjoy literature together with your kid is what I would say.
And also just children seeing their parents interested in learning. Just wanting to know more.
Every time you're reading, this is not the only thing that you do, but every time you're reading, you really are taking something from outside of you and putting it into you, which means you're affirming that there's something outside of you that needs to come into you, which is kind of the beginning of community. Okay, let's jump a little bit into the other side of this. So let's talk about students who might be struggling and maybe some things that their parents can do that don't help them to learn as much. So what are some of those characteristics that you might see?
Things that I think that don't help is really kind of doing it for them.
Yes.
Organizing their homework. I mean, you can help them to be accountable, but pull it out and say to the child, and I'm specifically more grammar student, show me your work. Show me what you need to do. You look at it. Show me what test do you have coming up, and then if you're a busy family, which normally we're involved in many extracurricular activities, use the time in the car.
Yes.
And, if you have 10 minutes in the car, make it fun. Let's do some math facts. Math facts are fun.
Well, and we are really thankful that parents practice their own math facts, but, it's not about the parent. We're trying to get the child to learn. And there's sometimes, I think, when parent identity and self-esteem gets tied into student grades even. Have you, not here at Veritas, I'm saying, but at other schools?
I've never been tied into my kids. Ha, ha, ha.
Anything else that you've seen that would be counterproductive things that parents can do?
Well, there's been instances where parents have made children read the stories a certain amount of time or read for over an hour, and it just crushes their spirit. It makes them not interested in doing better.
Yeah. So no, that's like a failure to recognize their bandwidth at that point.
Yes.
That they're made in God's image, but not angels yet.
Correct.
Yeah.
That's a good way to put it. And sometimes going back to grown-ups being maybe a little bit too invested in the grades, sometimes we help them too much. Yes. And they just need to struggle on their own a little bit.
Have you ever recognized, and this certainly doesn't just happen with boys, but really smart boys are very content to let other people do work for them. This is, sometimes I see very tired mothers and I'm like, he should be more tired and you should be less tired.
It's hard to see our children struggle and hard to see them fail. I know I have 4 and I have made many mistakes because I didn't want to see them struggle. And I have learned, the hard way, there are times that you have to. That's when you're going to learn. That's when they get it. it's just life. And you have to teach them how to struggle and how to look to the Lord, you know, for peace, for opening the doors.
Yeah. And again, that's so much more important than a 72 or a 55 or 100 on a math worksheet or a history test. Do boys and girls typically have the same kinds of struggles, or do you see, are there things that are more typically boy or typically girl here at Veritas?
I don't see a difference at all.
Okay.
And I do think that Veritas's commitment to recess helps with that.
Okay. What do you mean? Unpack that a little bit.
I think that if there are young kids or maybe boys that have wiggles, they have the chance to get them out.
Yes.
So I feel like that.
Not that girls would ever have wiggles.
Right. They
Sometimes
get the chance too. So I feel like where that might show up in other environments, I don't know that boy-girl disparity, I don't feel like it shows up here as much.
And when a lot of times in learning support, we will pull a child from their classroom to work one-on-one, and I know I'm always looking outside of recess because they need to get the wiggles out.
Well,
just
so this might, I hope this horrifies you as much. I've not been able to verify this because just heard it today, but there's a local public school district that is cutting all recesses back, even down in the grammar school. They only get one recess of 20 minutes a day. And some of them, because they have to stagger the times for the recess, end up getting it almost at the end of the day. What do you think?
Heartbreaking.
It's heartbreaking, isn't it? Because what boy with the wiggles is going to want to go to school when from 8 o'clock in the morning until 2:30 in the afternoon, he's going to say, you're only good if you sit still.
I had a student last year. He was a little first grader, and he had big time wiggles. And when I would walk down,
How do you define big time?
oh, they were big time wiggles. When I would walk down to pick him up, there's a long hallway, and now I normally don't do this with students, but I was like, okay, we are going to hop on one foot all the way to my room so that when he got to my room, he could sit, or I would let him sit in the spinny chair.
Oh my goodness.
But he had to sit still. And when we finished working, if he did really well, he got to do 3 spins.
Oh my.
That worked.
Yeah. I think kids might cheat on their taxes for a Skittle here at Veritas. So ladies, I was reading recently in a Wall Street Journal article that at Yale, I think it was 81% of the grades that are given are A's or A minuses. 81%.
At Yale?
At Yale. Okay. And I thought, my goodness, grade inflation is running rampant. But then the man told a story. This was a Harvard professor telling this story, and he was meeting with a student, and he found that student to be so apt and so fascinating. And after they had their meeting together, he looked the student up on his academic software to see how he was doing. And he had one of the lowest GPAs in his class of students at Harvard. He had it because he was taking such a broad range of difficult classes that his grades and his grade point average were not as high. And then the professor asked this question: which student do we want more of? Which student is it? Do we want the ones that have courage and that look to be broad people? I think this student was a history major or something like that, and he was taking some of the most difficult classes in mathematics and astrophysics. Okay? Now, and we would say, like, well, that's not a great way to get a high GPA. That it can produce an amazing kind of student, and we value that kind of breadth here at Veritas. So how do we, if you could say things to parents who are just desperately worried about GPA, or that maybe they're tempted to stare at the statistics instead of to properly value virtue and courage, what would you say to that? Or how could you encourage them that the one is much more important than the other?
When I was a student who cared very much for grades when I was back when I was a child.
Firstborn?
Firstborn.
Yeah.
And it was the main thing about me.
Mm-hmm.
And when I got to college and I had access to incredible teaching, broad classes,
Mm-hmm.
I felt the hollowness of my life distinctly. In a way, it drove me to Christ. But it was painful in that I had...
So academic idolatry is a good prelude to the gospel?
Yeah, right? And it totally was idolatry. And I have continued to pursue learning. I love learning. I love God's world. I love making connections between all the different things.
Mm-hmm. But if you were to go back, you'd take the risks, wouldn't you?
Yeah.
Yeah, because that courage to try that word in a sentence that is just beyond your reach, but you're trying to say the right thing. Mm. That's a goal or an aim that we want students to have.
Yeah. And you alluded to this earlier, but there's no grades in heaven anywhere else either.
It's a pass-fail.
Mm.
It's a pass-fail, but thankfully, the real question is, are you in Christ? Are you in Christ? Pass.
I mean, the measure of a life is how many things do you care about?
That's a beautiful sentence. Ladies, thank you so much for being in today, and thank you for all of the work that you do here at Veritas. We know that if God didn't want students to struggle, he would have made them differently. He wants them to struggle, and he wants us to then love them enough to step into their struggles with them, but then to help them to take care of themselves and then eventually be the people who are taking care of struggles elsewhere. So thank you so much for the work that you do here. And of course, like I say at the end of every podcast, if you like this podcast and what you hear, you can learn more about us at veritasacademy.com, or you can do something that would help us, and that is to subscribe to this podcast on all the places that you can find podcasts, and then give us a review and a rating if you like it. If you don't, please don't give us a review or rating.
How are you going to learn from your failures?
Yeah. Oh, sorry. Okay. I take it back. That was very hypocritical of me. If you don't like it, please tell us why, and we will fix it, and then say we change it to 5 stars because they have fixed it. Okay. Thank you so much, ladies.
You've been listening to Cultivate, the podcast of Veritas Academy, a preschool through 12th grade classical Christian school in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania. If you'd like to learn more about Veritas, visit veritasacademy.com to discover the truth, beauty, and goodness of classical Christian education.